Mark, I wanted to show you this, something I just learned to do myself. I never paid much attention to this stuff here, but there's a whole bunch of different shit on every game here. This will give you some puzzles on checkmate and three, and so that's nothing. But learning this stuff, distant opposition, direct, diagonal, pass pawn, stuff like that, you click over here on lesson, and the guy talks about what the hell what a pass pawn is and stuff. Watch, I'll show you. Or any of these things here. Puzzles is how to try to do them. You don't care about that. Just do the lessons and you can learn some stuff. Here's passed pawns. This talking guy is supposed to start talking his ass off. You click on this, I think.
One of the quickest ways to end a chess game is to overwhelm your opponent by getting an extra queen. And to get an extra queen, you're going to need to get one of your pawns to the other side of the board,
There's a pass pawn.
like this. And in order to do that, you're going to need what is called a passed pawn. A passed pawn is one that has a straight shot to the other side of the board without bumping into another pawn or being able to be captured by another pawn. The pawn has passed all the other pawn obstacles. Look at the pawn on f5. Is this a passed pawn?
No.
No, it's blocked by the pawn on f6. What about the pawn on b5? That's right. It's not blocked by any pawns and cannot be captured by another pawn as it advances up the board, so it's a passed pawn. One important feature of passed pawns is whether they are connected or not. Let's see what happens when you have a passed pawn that isn't connected. After b6, black can play king to c6, easily capturing that pawn before it gets to queen. In this position, white can save the pawn on b6 with the move c5. White has two connected passed pawns. Black will not be able to capture either of these pawns. Notice if black tries to take the pawn on c5, the other pawn runs up the board and promotes into a queen. Finally, you often can create a passed pawn by trading one of your pawns for one of the opponent's pawns when you have a pawn majority. A pawn majority is when you have more pawns on a certain side of the board than your opponent. In this position, white has two pawns against one pawn. This is a pawn majority, and white plays b6. After a takes b6, a takes b6, white captures back and now has a passed pawn. Can you make the most of your passed pawns? Let's see.
See, that's how you can do that stuff. Pretty cool, right? Let's see what this is. I don't know what this shit is. Distant opposition.
King and pawn endings are the building blocks of all other positions, and a single move can be the difference between winning, drawing, or losing a game. In this position, the kings are directly opposing each other, fighting for the key squares c6, d6, and e6. The side that has to move next loses this battle. The side that does not have to move has what is called direct opposition. Opposition is when there is an odd number of squares between the kings, and direct opposition is when the kings are directly facing each other with one square between them. Opposition is all about taking over a key square or preventing your opponent from moving to a key square. In this position, if white has to move, black has the opposition, so that after king c5, black keeps the opposition with king c7, preventing white's king from advancing. On the other hand, if it is black to move, white has the opposition. So if black's king moves to e7, white's king advances to c6, moving to a key square to help the pawn advance up the board and win the game.
We already knew this, right?
What happens if there is more than one square between the kings? Does opposition still matter? It does, and we are going to explore the idea of distant opposition. Let's get started. In this position, white plays king e2. In king and pawn endgames, the side with the pawn wants to get the king 2 ranks in front of the pawn. In this case, the key squares are e4, d4, and c4. If black tries to guard all 3 of these squares at once with king d5, white takes direct opposition with king d3. Black's king is forced to give up one of the key squares on the next turn, so white's king will advance 2 ranks in front of the pawn with a winning position. After king e2, black has only one way to draw this game, and that is with distant opposition. Where can black's king move to get on the same file as white's king with an odd number of squares between them?
To the left.
If you found king e6, great job. There is an odd number of squares between the kings, 3 squares, and it is not black's move. This means black has distant opposition. White's only way to make progress is to try and move the king forward, but once white does this, such as by playing king e3, black now takes direct opposition with king e5. White's king can't get 2 ranks in front of the pawn, so black prevents white from making progress and should draw the game. Let's take a look at another example. The main idea behind distant opposition is to turn it into direct opposition.
I never knew
In this position, can you see how white can gain distant opposition? That's right, with king b3. After king b6, white takes direct opposition with king b4. And if king c6, white plays king c4. After king c7, should white keep distant opposition with king e3? White can, but remember that white's goal is to get 2 ranks in front of the pawn. The key squares are 2 squares in front of the pawn, c4, and the other 2 squares to the side, b4 and d4. After king c7, white should play king c4. You might wonder why white would allow black to take direct opposition with king c6. The reason why white wants to be 2 ranks in front of the pawn is so that when black takes opposition, like in this situation, white can simply play c3. White now has the opposition, and black's king is forced to give up one of the key squares. Let's take a look at one more position together. In this position, white is down a pawn and faces a difficult defense. If white tries to quickly grab a pawn after king f3, black wins the game after king d1. Black now has diagonal opposition. After king f4, king e2, king takes f5, black captures white's pawn with king takes e3 and will advance the d-pawn to victory. If white plays king f2, black takes direct opposition with king d2. And after king f3, black plays the waiting move king e1. Notice white's king cannot take direct opposition because the pawn on e3 is in the way. If white plays king f4, then we reach the same winning position for black after king e2. If white plays king g3, black wins again after king e2. The only way to guard the pawn is with king f4. And black now takes direct opposition with king f2. White is forced to give up the pawn and enter the same losing position we looked at earlier. So what is white to do? White can save the game by gaining distant opposition. After king g1, there is an odd number of squares between the kings, and it is not white's move. This means white has distant opposition. If black plays king d2, white takes direct opposition with king f2. After king c2, white keeps the distant opposition with king g2. And after king c3,
See the 3
white
squares
continues
in
to
between
shadow
them.
the black king using
Try to
distant
keep the
opposition with
the
king
3
g3.
squares. This is interesting.
Amazingly, black cannot make any progress. White will
never
continue
knew
to
any
shadow
of that.
black's king until sooner or later, black tries to attack white's pawn with king d3. White can now gain direct opposition with king f3. Black has one last trap after king c2. What should white play? If white plays king e2, black now wins the game because after king c3, white loses the opposition because white cannot play king e3. After king f3, king d3. If king f4, black plays king e2. And if king f2, black plays king d2, returning to positions we already studied when black has a winning endgame.
This is
After king c2, white's only move to save the game is by keeping distant opposition with the move king g2. White shadows the king using distant opposition and waits for a moment to take direct opposition. Black cannot make any progress. Now that you've learned how to both win and save positions using distant opposition, let's put your skills to the test.
You could never fucking memorize this to play an actual game. It's too complicated. Anyway, I just wanted to show you this shit. When you get to this point, when you do the analysis and then you do the other guy, this stuff here you can look at and you can click lesson and try to learn some stuff from it. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, over here you can do old games and shit. See, you get on this finger thing, you go over here to archive, okay? You crank it, and then here's all of your old game, the one you just played, and then before that. So you can find any game you want in here, okay? And then just click on it. Click on your name or the other guy's name, double click it, whatever the hell. The fuck happened there? Oh, click on analyze. Here you go. Don't click on that shit. That just brings up the deal. Click analyze on any of these, right? Bam, there it goes. So then you get the standard analyze thing. You already know about this, right? And here's the report part of it, okay? And all of this shit here is an whatever, right? So here's a different one. Mate and 3, isolated pawn, castling, you know how to castle, whatever. But if there's something interesting here you don't understand or something, you could do the lessons. So anyway, I just wanted to show you. I never knew about it. I never even paid attention to it. I just looked at it and said, oh, the hell with it, and went on to something else, you know. I did the key moments, you know, where it showed certain parts of the game were good and bad and all that crap. But I never clicked on those other guys. Okay, I just wanted to show you that.